Our story begins with our wonderful guy walking around his street with his thoughts. But judging by him, he doesn't like them because he sucks in his life. The guy just returned from the army and immediately went to work part-time, so he didn't even have time to have fun. And this upset him very much. At the same time, two women were sitting at his house drinking their juices while having cultural conversations. They were waiting for Jong Seob, who was returning from his part-time job at that time with his thoughts and were talking about him, when he suddenly came home. Aunt immediately ran up to him joyfully because she had not seen him for a very long time since he left for the army. His aunt immediately grabbed his hand and called him to the table, but Jung-sub was a little awkward because they were close to each other. Jung-sub's mom suggested he take a break from work, but Jong-sub refused this offer because he was very bored sitting at home all day. Aunt immediately intervened in this conversation because she believed that his mother was proud of her son because he had become so mature and independent. Right after that, the aunt handed Jung-sub a can of cool drink because he had just returned from the street tired. Aunt sat down next to him and then Jong Seob began to examine her because for her 35 years she looked very young and attractive. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted again. It was his aunt who started asking him about the job he had to find. She expected to hear good news from him, but unfortunately, he was never able to find a job, which upset her very much. At that moment, she approached him to calm him down because he was a little upset about his work. But instead of reassuring him, she decided to offer him a job herself because her daughter needed a tutor. His mother was not surprised by this proposal because her son studied at a prestigious university, but she clarified which daughter she was talking about. Then his aunt replied that, "Oh, Nari, it was a daughter who didn't study at all and it wasn't even clear who she was like." This conversation angered the aunt because Nari was not her own daughter. Despite this, the aunt also spent a lot of effort on raising her. Jung-sub's mom quickly realized that this made her sister angry, so she apologized and offered her more drinks to make the situation better. When the aunt reached for the drink, Jong Seob was surprised because he saw the treasure trove that the aunt took from her house. She quickly returned to her place, but even so, Jong Seob was very embarrassed and was ready to climb the treasury. His aunt continued talking to his mother, but now even this did not interrupt his thoughts because he was in complete shock. Some time passed and Jong Seob was already her daughter's teacher. They were in her room. The girl complained that she was very sleepy, but this was not an excuse because she studied very poorly. She tried to communicate with him, but he decided to tell her that he would tell her mom that she was distracted during lessons, although he was on the phone. At that moment, the aunt suddenly entered their room and called Jong Seob, who immediately left. She decided to warn him that she was going to go grocery shopping with his mom, but at that moment she also handed him the money. He wanted to refuse it, but the aunt insisted that he take the money for himself. After that, he took the money, and the aunt was already getting ready to leave there. As soon as the aunt left the apartment, Jong Seob decided to check his condition because he instantly blushed when the aunt started talking to him. He was very embarrassed, but suddenly he heard the voice of his niece who was talking to someone on the phone in the room. He quickly returned to her room, but she had already managed to lie down on her bed to sleep and take a break from her lessons. Despite the fact that her tutor was angry and told her not to skip classes, she did not pay attention to him and continued to lie. He couldn't let her do this, but at one point, he noticed that she had big melons in her room which he really wanted to treat himself to, but couldn't say so. He was very surprised by this, so he decided to let her rest until he returned from the bathroom. His student was already unconscious by that time and was sleeping calmly in her bed despite the voice of her teacher. The teacher went to the bathroom to his thoughts and thought about what made him do this and allow her to take a break from lessons, when suddenly he noticed something interesting in their bathroom. It was a toy. He instantly understood what it was, so he immediately grabbed this toy, even though deep down he knew that it was wrong. His head was in a fog and he couldn't think rationally because of the gold bar, so he immediately decided to take it. Playing with this toy, he imagined how he would win his aunt like a pirate in the seas taking gold. His imagination clouded his mind so much that he didn't even immediately hear the knocks on the bathroom. But when he heard these knocks, it was too late because he had finished the game. This embarrassed him very much because he absolutely did not expect to find himself in such a situation and realized that he had lost in his life. This situation stressed him very much because he did not understand at all what to do in such a situation when his student was standing outside his door. His student at that moment was diligently knocking on the bathroom because she wanted to use the restroom. She again reached for the handle to the bathroom, but the door opened so sharply that she got scared at that moment and jumped back, forgetting about her desire. She was mad at him because she almost finished her business right outside the bathroom door, but he didn't pay much attention to it. Jong Seob immediately after leaving the bathroom announced that he was not feeling well and decided to run away from there. This surprised his student very much because she completely unexpectedly expected such an act from him, but he was already running away from there. At the same time, his mother and aunt were already returning to their home after shopping, but they were very tired. Aunt kept telling Jung Seob's mom that they should have ordered home delivery so they wouldn't be so tired, but his mother believed that the food would spoil while she was traveling. My aunt didn't understand this at all, but she offered to help her sister with the packages, when suddenly they noticed a couple in front of them who looked strange because the guy looked very young for his girlfriend. Mom and aunt stood still and began to discuss this couple because they looked strange together due to the age difference. But it didn't matter to my aunt because she believed that they might love each other, despite the difference in their ages. Jung Seob's mother agreed with this because she also believed that not everyone could do this and said that this woman's boyfriend was not bad. But then the aunt interrupted Jung Seob's mom and said that her son looks much better than this guy they met. At the same time, Jung Seob was diligently trying to improve the situation with the game he did. He blamed himself a lot because he couldn't imagine that he wouldn't be able to restrain himself and do something like that. He was excited. Despite his excitement, by this time he had already begun to think rationally, so he very quickly came up with a plan on how he would correct the situation. He had to return home to his aunt again, but it was tomorrow morning, so he decided that he could play with the pink doll again. This guy was crazy. A whole day passed from that moment and he returned to their house again, but now he was alone. He knew the password to their apartment because he came to them when he was still very small. He quickly entered the password, and the hope that the password had not been changed was justified. The door began to open slightly, and he entered. He entered the apartment, but to his regret, his aunt was at home who did not at all expect to meet him there. Aunt immediately wondered why Jung Seob came to them so early today. But Jung Seob very quickly found an excuse and pretended that he was just passing by and was bored, so he decided to go into them. He quickly told her about it and asked his aunt to use their bathroom. Of course she allowed him. He immediately went to the bathroom but was very scared because he thought that she should be in the gym at that time. Jung Seob was about to return the toy to its place and quickly leave from there, but suddenly he thought that she might have noticed the missing ingot. This scared him very much because then he realized that if she noticed this loss, she would immediately understand that it was he who took her toy for himself. Then he decided that he would just put the toy in his aunt's room so that she would think that she had simply lost them, and decided to wait until she left the house. He left the bathroom, but then his aunt stood right in front of the bathroom door, which scared him very much, and his aunt decided to ask him why he was so surprised. Before he had time to answer this question, his aunt continued. She was worried about his condition because her daughter told her yesterday that he was not feeling well. Jung Seob began to worry a lot because his aunt stood next to the bathroom all the time and did not hear him wash himself. His aunt didn't like wasting time at all, so she decided to immediately ask him about her toy, which she lost yesterday. This question about the toy made Jung Seob blush and feel embarrassed because it was completely unexpected for him. At that moment, he completely realized for himself that she knew about everything since yesterday, and he was very ashamed. Then the aunt asked him to return her his toy, which Jung Seob took from her house. Jung Seob blushed and began to sincerely apologize to her, returning her toy. She was not angry with him, but decided to warn him not to do this again, because in the future it could develop into something more. Jung Seob, after his offense, could not even calmly look into her eyes and only stood in front of her with his eyes downcast. He was very ashamed in front of her and he could not even say a word, but at one moment his aunt decided that he needed her help. The help from her aunt really embarrassed Jung Seob because he didn't expect this from her at all. She decided to play with him. She decided to teach him a lesson, but as for me, everyone would only dream of such lessons from such women. He was stunned by such an unexpected act from his aunt, so he couldn't even move from his place and didn't know what to do. But his aunt just stood there. His aunt realized that he would continue to stand there if nothing was done, so she decided to take the first step at the beginning of their training to get acquainted. She touched him with a gentle touch of her small, weak hands and whispered right in his ear that he could do whatever he wanted. At the same time, a very exciting moment was approaching for them, namely what was happening outside their house. After all, just a couple of kilometers away from them was his aunt's daughter, who was returning home in the heat to be on time for a lesson with Jung Seob. It was so hot outside that some could even see heat waves, so Nari quickly accelerated to quickly get to her home under the cool breeze from the air conditioner. The situation got tense, but Jung Seob stood in front of his aunt and asked for forgiveness, saying that he would never dare to do that again. His aunt was determined because she knew that at every opportunity, he was trying to look into her toy and play with it. She was determined with her choice, so she told him that this would be his last opportunity to play with her, as a lesson for him not to do that again. Jung Seob was in complete shock and didn't know what to do in such a situation. Here even I would have fallen into the ground from shame. Although Jong-sub was shy, his aunt was determined, so she again took the first step, grabbing his hand and allowing him to touch the most important toy. It was so incredible and unexpected for him that his entire mind literally turned off and he could no longer think rationally. The hand that touched the toy received more and more pleasure from it, just like the aunt herself who allowed him to play. Only after a couple of moments, Jong-seob was able to understand that his aunt was already warmed up and completely ready to play with him, so he realized that he was not the only one who wanted this. He couldn't believe that this was all happening to him. It was all like his pleasant dream. It all seemed like his dream. He had never heard his aunt the way she was while playing. Her elegant voice turned into sweet sounds. This all went so far that the aunt herself began to offer him options for continuing the game. Jong-seob was surprised, but the aunt insisted on it. At the same time, a terrible event was approaching, which they are not expecting at all now. They will soon be screwed up. Nari is going home. Jong-sub's nose was filled with a pleasant sweet aroma the moment he played, because she was sweating while playing. But there was something more incredible than this sweet, pleasant aroma. It was the sounds of their sweet game. Jong-seob was no longer even going to stop during the game, because his aunt's reaction from his gameplay was incredible. My aunt really admired the way he played this game because he was just a pro at it, despite the fact that he had never played it before. This all made my aunt blush and think about how he would defeat her in this game. She really felt very good at that moment. She felt so good that she instantly lost to him, forgetting about what happens after defeat. She accidentally spilled all the juice from her mouth on him. This event made Jong-seob fall into a stupor. He did not understand at all what had happened. His aunt at that moment very quickly ran into the room for napkins, because she accidentally doused him. She returned very quickly and immediately handed him a towel, so that he could quickly wipe himself off from all this. Not even a second passed after that. When the door suddenly began to open, it was Nari who returned home. She entered home and immediately noticed Jong-sub's shoes, and slightly raising her eyes, noticed him himself. She saw him on the floor on his knees, which surprised her very much, so she asked what happened to him. But Jong-sub was not a timid person, so he very quickly came up with an excuse for this, and said that he accidentally slipped and fell right at the entrance. When Nari heard about this, she was happy, and asked with hope if they would have a lesson today, because she thought that he was feeling bad and would leave again. Because of the drink that aunt spilled on Jong-seob, Nari thought that he was taking a shower, and this was only to his advantage, because now she will not be able to tell him anything. At the same moment, his aunt quickly came out, who managed to hide before her daughter could see anything. Then she quickly got ready and decided to leave. Nari was unhappy with what was happening, because she would have to study again and she was sulking about it. Aunt was about to leave the apartment, when suddenly a sudden voice stopped them in an instant. It was the voice of Nari, who found her lost toy right on the table. Jong-seob was surprised. He did not understand at all what was happening there, and the aunt decided to tell her daughter that she simply found this toy on the terrace, so she decided to bring it inside. At that moment, Jong-seob lost all his thoughts because his aunt told him that it was her toy, and that's what he himself thought until the moment this happened. After that, the aunt left, and Nari brought Jong-sub a shirt so that he could change his wet one. At the moment when he was changing his clothes, his thoughts were still on what happened to him just a couple of hours ago. He couldn't believe that his aunt could lie to him like that to play with him, so he had a lot of different thoughts in his head. Nari was in the bathroom at that moment, and Jong-seob was waiting for her outside to start the lesson, but Nari was thinking about something else, about her found toy. She could not understand at all how her toy ended up on the terrace because she had checked it several times since yesterday, and so thought after thought, she thought that Jong-seob stole her toy yesterday because it seemed strange to her what she saw when entering the apartment. She was confident in her guesses and even laughed at this, but a second later the realization came to her. Why did he do that? These thoughts made her think about something wrong, which embarrassed her very much. The aunt decided to call her man and invite him to meet for a cup of coffee because she didn't feel very well after what happened. But the man was not very happy about this because she distracted him from work and called him during working hours. In fact, the reason for his dissatisfaction was not this, but the blonde who was about to start playing with him, and at that moment he was distracted from it. Right after he told him not to be interrupted, he hung up the call and told this attractive blonde to continue playing with his controller. Auntie didn't even suspect anything about this, so she decided to call Jung-seob's mother to go somewhere with her. Jung-seob's mom arrived at the place very quickly, and they went to sit in the cafe, having made an order. They sat down at their table. Jung-seob's mother very quickly realized that something was wrong with her aunt, because she looked very sad and bored at that moment. But she very quickly found a solution to this and suggested that her aunt ask her husband to buy her a car, because she believed that if he bought it for her, then she would not be so bored and she would be able to drive it. For the aunt, this idea was a little dangerous because she had not driven for a very long time. Then the aunt found out that Jung-seob drives a car very well. She was very surprised by this because only now she found out that Jung-seob was a car driver in his army. Jung-seob was in the same room with Nari at that time, but he was a little embarrassed because Nari behaved freely and he could freely look through her. He warned her to hide her toys, but then Nari began to slander him for this. This really pissed off Jung-seob because he didn't really want to look at it, because he thought she was a child and she was just mocking him. Jung-seob was not angry for long and at one point decided to ask Nari if her aunt carries the same toys with her. But this question outraged Nari. Jung-seob tried to brush it off and decided to just say that he thought about their similar tastes, like mother and daughter. This confused Nari even more, and without noticing it, she shouted at him, but after a second she stopped and calmed down. Nari was provoked and she told what no one should have known, namely that her mother likes to walk around unprotected with herself. Jung-seob was very confused, but still continued to try to manipulate her to find out a little more about it. That's when he found out that his aunt was actually allergic to protection, so from the day she found out, she never carried it with her again. Then Jung-seob realized that everything he saw that day was the obvious truth. Some time passed and evening had already come. The aunt and her husband were in the same room, and then the aunt decided to talk to her husband about the car. The husband was surprised that she was asking him for this because she had never wanted a car before, but she asked him very much. The husband was impartial and only told her that he could think about it, without giving her a direct answer. Aunt couldn't let him avoid answering like that, so she decided to make him give in and buy her a car. Then she suddenly started playing with him. Uncle was absolutely delighted because he didn't expect that something like this could happen to him again today. Aunt was the best at this, so Uncle was already delighted from the very first minute of the game and closed his eyes, literally accepting defeat. He decided to tell her that he was very tired after a day of work and was not ready for such games, but his aunt was decisive and said that she would do everything herself. A moment passed when the aunt and uncle were already completely involved in this game and enjoying it. The uncle forgot about his fatigue. Aunt also enjoyed this game very much because she had been waiting for this for a very long time. Her sensitivity during the game was simply at its maximum. Even though she was playing with her husband, she was thinking about what happened to Jung-seob. She believed that she became like this because she was stretched in the morning. Uncle just lay there and watched his game, just enjoying it all. He didn't even have to do anything for it. Aunt tried very hard to play well, but at one point something went wrong and she tried to correct the situation. But at that moment, her husband stopped the game, got out of bed, threw his card in her direction, and only said that she could now buy herself whatever she wanted. It's only been a day since she was already riding in her new car with Jung-seob. Jung-seob became her personal teacher in driving. Surprisingly, despite the long break, everything worked out great for her aunt, and this couldn't help but make her happy. They had been riding for a long time, so they stopped on the side of the road and decided to take a break. Aunt sat next to him and listened to him praise her driving skills, but they both had completely different thoughts in their heads. In this regard, they understood each other. Jung-seob found it very difficult not to look at her, because now he was sure that she was always without her protection. Then the aunt suddenly moved towards him and began to embarrass him with stories of what he had recently done with her game. But she stopped very quickly because he was all red with embarrassment and said that it was just a joke. The place was quiet and they were enjoying each other's company. But soon, they will be each other. Aunt suddenly asked him a very embarrassing question, which was whether he liked looking at her controllers who looked into your eyes themselves. She noticed his glance at them while driving. At that moment, she remembered that last time he had not been able to look at them up close, so she decided to let him examine them completely. He was very embarrassed and she already thought that he didn't want to see them, but then he quickly reacted and began to say that he wanted. Aunt laughed and pretended that she was just teaching him a lesson, even though she herself longed to see him in all his glory. At that moment, Jung-seob realized that this might be his last chance to look at something like that, so he agreed. Auntie had been preparing for this for so long and teasingly that Jung-seob could barely restrain himself from taking the toy from her and starting to play with it. But as soon as he noticed them, he was speechless for a moment, and the first thing he could say was that they were simply beautiful. For Jung-seob, this was just the beginning, because the aunt was not going to stop there and allowed him to touch her toys. He was delighted because this was his first experience, but his aunt liked it even more and she was not going to just let him go from this place. She told him in plain text that not only could he play with her like that, but he would have to pause the game as soon as he reached the limit. It was so inviting. And just like that, their usual training train turned into a huge game outside. They enjoyed each other while playing. From the aunt's face, one could understand that she was delighted with him, even though he was only a beginner player, but she already admired his skills. It was only about one part of the game, but Young-seob was not going to stop there, so he decided to continue until the very end. For my aunt, it was just wonderful. Although she didn't tell him about it, she felt very pleased during such a game. He made her close her eyes in pleasure. Even though she was very pleased at that moment, for her this game had to end, so she accidentally yelled at Young-seob, because he didn't hear her at all. It was already late, so they quickly got ready from that place and decided to continue their journey, but to the house. Young-seob didn't really like this situation, because he was just starting his game and couldn't even show her all his capabilities and hidden skills. They were about to return home when suddenly their aunt received a call. It was Jong-seob's mother, who asked her if her son was nearby. She asked this because she just now remembered that it was her son's birthday today. Aunt was surprised that even Jong-seob himself forgot about his birthday and considered it a completely ordinary day. She suddenly noticed that the toy was ready and fully charged, which surprised her very much at that moment because she had not expected it at all. All these factors influenced his aunt's decision because she decided to wish him a happy birthday and let him play with her toy. She became very soft and told him to quickly return to the car. She was cunning at that moment, and Jong-seob did not understand anything at all. But when they got to the car, his aunt told him to sit in the back seats. He was confused and didn't understand why they sat there. In fact, his aunt just didn't want to leave him without a birthday present. At that moment, she was frank and said that no one would have to know about this gift, so he would need to hide this secret and quickly start playing with her. He didn't believe what was happening, but very quickly agreed to it because he also really wanted it, and after a couple of minutes, they were already enjoying the game. It was just an amazing feeling that he couldn't describe, because for him, it was all the first time. They were just warming up in this game, but his aunt decided to start the most important thing. And then she was surprised because his game console was so powerful. For the aunt, it was admiration, so she immediately began to play with it. This made Jong-seob instantly enjoy it. It was very difficult for him to restrain himself, so he already realized that very soon he would lose to his aunt like that. But fortunately for him, his aunt stopped at that moment and he did not lose to her, although he held on to this game with his last breath. His aunt was happy and decided to ask if he liked her gift. At that moment, he became very embarrassed, and this made her very happy because he was cute at that moment. This was just the beginning of the game, and she wanted to continue. But for this, she decided to ask him for permission, and then he made her understand everything with his actions. She was surprised by his determination at that moment, but this was only the beginning for them, because there was still a final game ahead that would decide their fate.